Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Roads? Well, we're going, we don't need roads.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
No, I am your father.
You're listening to After the Ending, the only film podcast where we tell you what happens after the ending of your favorite films. And now, here are your hosts, Mike Spring and Phil Edwards. Hello and welcome to another episode of After the Ending. I'm Mike Spring.
And I'm Phil Edwards.
How are you doing tonight, Phil?
It's all good here. How are you, Mike?
I am doing quite well, thank you. I am super excited about tonight's episode. We have two great movies to talk about, and we have our very first special guest.
Yes.
And on top of all that, we have some reader feedback. It is a jam-packed episode. I can't wait to jump into everything.
Lots going on.
Are you as excited as I am?
Very excited. Looking forward to the guest spot, and I'm looking forward to the films we're doing as well.
Should be a good time, so.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we, well, first of all, a couple of things, actually. We have a lot to cover tonight, so we're going to just take it as it comes.
Busy, busy, busy.
That's right. First thing I want to do is I wanted to mention that a few weeks ago we talked about a charity that we were supporting called Aiden's A-Team, which supports the JDRF, the Junior Diabetes Research Fund. And our friend of the show, Mike Nichter, and his team their goal was to raise $10,000 for diabetes research. And not only did they reach that goal, they raised $11,600. I believe they were in the top 3 teams for fundraising goals that they raised the most money. So that's pretty impressive. So we just want to say congratulations to them.
That's amazing. Well done. Well done to everybody involved. It's fantastic news.
Yeah, so big congratulations to those guys. All right, moving into our films. Phil, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to be talking about tonight?
We will be talking a little bit later about The Crow, the 1994 film starring Brandon Lee. But first we'll be doing the After the Ending for Steve Martin's The Jerk, which was from 1979. We will also be doing our top 10 films of 1974.
Lots of fun stuff to get to. So, all right, why don't you start things off then, Phil, and tell us what makes The Jerk such a jerk?
Okay, The Jerk, directed by Carl Reiner, written by Steve Martin, Carl Gottlieb, and Michael Elias. It was also Steve Martin's first starring role. Okay, so to just bring you up to speed on the film. Okay, so Steve Martin plays Navin R. Johnson, and we open with him. He's a homeless man, and he tells us his story. He's the adopted son of an African-American family, yet he's unaware of being adopted. His lack of rhythm also sets him apart from the family, but he doesn't realise. But one night he listens to crazy rhythm, and he starts dancing. He's finally got a bit of rhythm. Taking this as a sign, he hitchhikes to St. Louis, as that's where the song was broadcast from. Stopping at a hotel, he's woken by a dog. He thinks the dog's alerting him to a fire. He wakes everybody up, but there's no fire. The crowd, obviously angry from being woken up, give the dog a new name, which I won't mention here.
Good idea.
Navin ends up working at a gas station, and as he's there, we see that some kind of psycho character is going through the phone book and picks Navin's name at random. He says, I'm going to kill him. Navin's helping a customer called Stan Fox, sees he's having a problem with his glasses and runs in the back, puts a handle on them and a little nose brake so they don't fall off. Fox is amazed by this and offers to split the profits of the invention and leaves. The psycho starts shooting at Navin and chases him into a carnival.
I have to just say that's one of my favorite scenes of not just this movie, but any comedy movie of all time, when he's shooting at the cans.
Yeah, and he's going, all these cans are defective. Yeah. Yeah.
It's these cans.
Yeah.
He hates the cans.
Yeah.
Stay away from the cans.
It's brilliant.
I love that. So good.
Navin gets away from the psycho killer and ends up getting a job at the carnival, and there he meets a scary stunt biker called Patty Bernstein. They end up in a relationship, and Navin finally discovers what his special purpose is for. Again, we won't go into it here.
Yeah, we'll just leave that one alone.
Yeah. He ends up meeting Marie, and they fall in love and sing a lovely song on the ukulele. But she ends up leaving him because he hasn't got a financial future. He's a bit all over the place. Eventually, though, Stan Fox gets back in touch, and Navin's invention, the Opti-Grab, is a big hit, and Navin's now a rich man. He finds and marries Marie, and they get a huge mansion. Life is good. However, Carl Reiner, the director of this film, and millions of other people all end up cross-eyed because of the Opti-Grab, and Navin has to pay out $10 million in damages, leaving him bankrupt, homeless. Marie leaves him, and we're back at the beginning of the film. Luckily, though, Marie turns up with Navin's family. They've been investing all the money that Navin sent home and are rich. It's a happy ending. Navin and Marie are back with Navin's family, and we end the film with everybody dancing away because Navin's got really good rhythm.
Nicely done.
It obviously doesn't bring across the humour of the film because there's so many great little jokes and things.
Right.
It's a Very funny film.
It is. It's very silly. It's very funny. But I think he did a nice job. You know, we get the broad strokes across. If people haven't seen The Jerk, they should go watch it. It's a very funny movie.
Yeah.
And our endings, well, I think will probably make a lot more sense if you've seen the film. But hopefully you can enjoy them even if you haven't.
That's correct. So what have you got then for your day after?
All right. Well, the day after, I actually pick up right when the movie ends. While Naven and Marie and his family are all singing and dancing,
Yeah.
Naven slips and falls and breaks his ankle, which is lucky because right as he falls, the crazed shooter shows up again and takes a shot at him and hits the window behind where his head was just a minute ago. He takes another shot and he breaks another window. So Naven yells for his family to get to safety. It's the windows. He hates these windows. Everybody stay away from the windows.
I love it.
The shooter, thank you. The shooter runs out of ammo and comes down to kill Naven by hand. But Naven stops him by simply asking him what he's so angry about. And the man sort of breaks down and we find out that he's depressed because he was discharged from the army.
Ah.
Naven asks him what he did in the army, and the man tells him that he was a sharpshooter. So Naven thinks the problem might be his eyesight, so he gives him one of the opti-grabs, and the man tries it on, and he realizes that the problem that's caused millions of other people's eyesight to go cross-eyed has actually fixed his vision.
Oh.
So he thanks Naven and runs off to re-enlist in the army, and then Naven goes to the hospital to get his broken ankle fixed.
Okay, I like that.
Thank you.
Very in keeping with the film.
Yeah, I had some fun with this one. There's
Yeah.
not a lot of seriousness to be found here in my endings. So
Okay. Well, mine. Naven catches up with his family. Mine's quite a boring day after, to be honest. He talks about what he's been up to, and Marie talks to him about their future. But she suggests music as he can play the ukulele and sing. He never really thought about it before. And Naven's family, though, decide to keep a closer eye on him because he's a bit of an idiot. And
Yeah.
they do worry about him.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
that's my day after. It's short and sweet, but
Hey, there you go. There you go. I'm sure there is more to come.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more to come. What about your immediate aftermath?
All right, so Naven and Marie settle down in the Johnson family homestead. Naven, however, isn't content just to live on his family's money, so he decides to throw himself full-time into inventing because he figures he did good with the opti-grabs, so maybe there's some more in him.
Yeah.
His first invention, however, is a new form of birth control.
Oh,
and
good God.
It's a bust. So within a year, Marie is pregnant, and she gives birth to their baby daughter, who, despite being a girl, they name Naven R. Johnson 2, the sequel.
Oh, I like that.
Thanks. Meanwhile, the crazed shooter re-enlists in the army, gets deployed overseas, and goes on, with the help of the opti-grab, to become the deadliest sniper in U.S. military history. Eventually, they make a movie about him called American Sniper.
Oh, okay. Good stuff.
So, all right, how about your immediate aftermath?
Okay, I've got Naven and Maria happy. They end up playing the local bars, singing songs, and they prove very popular. Some of Naven's family also play along with them when they have the chance, and they all have a great time. The family's very, very happy. Eventually, though, the carnival comes into town, and Patty Bernstein has decided she wants revenge on Marie, who ended up slapping her, well, punching her, knocking her out, didn't she, in the film. She turns up when Naven and Marie are playing. Patty gets very drunk and causes a commotion, starts heckling them. Naven talks to her, and unbeknownst to him, he is absolutely hilarious. The crowd love him.
Ah, nice.
They think it's all part of the act. Eventually, though, Naven talks Patty round, and he gets up on stage, and they all sing a song until Patty ends up passing out through all the alcohol she's been drinking.
Nice.
So that's what I've got for that. What about the long term?
All right, so long term, it doesn't get any more serious from here, let me tell you. So Naven keeps inventing, and he actually becomes quite good at it, and he goes on to create many of the 80s greatest crazes, including, but not limited to,
Go on.
jelly bracelets,
Yep.
the Rubik's Cube, which was almost called the Naven's Cube, baby on board signs, the calculator watch, garbage pail kids, leg warmers, micro machines, and, unfortunately, the mullet.
Oh, good God.
Unfortunately, Naven loses much of his fortune from all of these inventions in the 1989 stock crash, so he decides to relocate to suburbia and settle into a regular life. Since he's become somewhat infamous and reviled for creating the mullet, Naven changes his name to George Banks so he can try and fit in more. And a couple of years later, his daughter, Naven R. Johnson 2, the sequel, who's taken on the nickname of Annie, announces that she's getting married. And Naven finds that he has a hard time being the father of the bride.
Oh, excellent.
As usual,
I like it.
I bring it around to another movie, but there you go.
No, that's a good one. I like that.
Thank you.
Okay.
How about you? What do we got?
I've got Nathan, after the success of playing in the bars and proving very funny, he's become a hugely successful comedian, musician, and he's described as a wild and crazy guy.
Nice.
However, he can't understand what people find so funny, as he just talks about his life, but he does love making people laugh, so he carries on. Him and Marie eventually get married, and they have a child. They call it Lloyd Johnson, but they give him a middle name based on the holiday on which he was born, which was Christmas. And Lloyd eventually likes to just be called Lloyd Christmas.
Lloyd Christmas. Very nice.
Right. Thank you very much.
That would mean that the jerk gave birth to a son who was dumb and maybe had a friend who was
even dumber. Yes.
Very good. Yeah, there you go. That's a good way to tie two movies together about very, very stupid people.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, stupid is as stupid does.
That's right. I've always wondered why the jerk wasn't called the idiot, because it always seemed to me that he was more of an idiot than a jerk. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
he's not like a mean guy. He's just stupid.
Well, actually, funny you should mention that. There was Dostoevsky's book, The Idiot, and Steve Martin. He said he wanted the film to be called something short. You have the feeling of an epic tale, like Dostoevsky's The Idiot, but not like that, like The Jerk, as he put it.
There you go.
So there you go. So you hit the nail on the head. It was exactly what they were going for.
Excellent.
You came out a different way.
There you go. See, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, very nicely done, Phil. Do you have any jerky trivia for us?
Jerky trivia. Well, you got beef,
right?
And
then you dehydrate it for several hours. It's quite expensive.
Well, it was based. The whole concept was based on a line from Steve Martin's stand-up act, where he said, "It wasn't always easy for me. I was born a poor black child."
Right.
And that's where it sort of came on, and I think he wrote lots of different bits and pieces, which all eventually came together to be the film.
Right.
Stanley Kubrick apparently loved the film. It was one of his favourites.
Really?
Yeah, that would surprise me. But
yeah, seriously.
Bill Murray was going to have a cameo in it in a scene, but that was cut from the final film, which would have been nice to see. But
sure.
Because it's always good to see a bit of Bill Murray. And there was one little bit of trivia which I found a little bit interesting. Jackie Mason's in The Jerk. He plays a character called Harry Hortonian. And 9 years later, Jackie Mason played a character called Jack Hortonian in Caddyshack 2.
Yeah, interesting.
I've no idea if they were related in any way, but sometimes they do that, don't you, with comedy characters?
Yeah, just have fun with it and tie things together for the audience with the sharp eye, you know.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thing as well. Steve Martin's favourite moment of the film was when him and Bernadette Peters sing "Tonight You Belong to Me." Martin felt the moment was very touching, and at the film's premiere, he was really looking forward to that scene coming up. And the scene came along, and most of the audience left to go and buy some popcorn.
That's terrible.
Well, it's a musical number. Not everybody likes them.
Well, sure. I know, I get that, but poor Steve Martin.
I know. Must have been gutted.
I'm sure he was. Oh, jeez. Well, there you go. So those are our endings for The Jerk. It's a fun film. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. Believe me, we didn't spoil anything by telling you the story. It's not really a movie that predicates on a heavy plot line. So
it's all about the jokes.
Exactly. All right. Well, if you have thoughts on how you think The Jerk might have ended after the ending, feel free to drop us a line. We'll fill you in on how to do that a little bit later in the episode. So why don't we move on then to our second film, which is very near and dear to my heart, and it is The Crow.
Yes, The Crow, 1994 film, and I do believe we have a special guest who starred in the film who will be giving us there after the ending.
That's right. We were very fortunate to speak with Rochelle Davis, who plays 12-year-old Sarah in the film. And she's a major character. She is one of the stars of the film alongside Brandon Lee and Ernie Hudson. And so I actually caught up with her just a week or so ago. And she was great, first of all, but she was also kind enough to let me pick her brain a little bit. And she told us what she thinks her character of Sarah would be doing now and what her after the ending is. So we're really excited to get to share our first kind of celebrity after the ending, where somebody who played a character that we're going to talk about really tells us what they think happened to that character. So it's pretty cool.
I'm absolutely blown away. It's amazing that you managed to meet her, and also that she said yes. I mean, it's so many thanks to her for doing that.
Yes, absolutely. We're very thrilled. And she was, like I said, she was great. She couldn't have been nicer. And I really like her ending as well. I think she did a very, she's clearly put some thought into, where this character would have gone. Probably much more thought than we are about to. So we're going to share that in just a few minutes after we finish our endings. But first, let's get into The Crow, shall we, Phil?
Yes, looking forward to your summing it up.
All right. Well, The Crow, like you said, 1994, directed by Alex Proyas. I believe it was his first feature film, and he went on to do some really great work, including Dark City, which is another one of my favorites.
I love that film. I like that one.
Yep, and he did iRobot and several other really good films.
Yeah, I'm the same. I agree with you there.
So the film obviously also starred the late Brandon Lee, who infamously died on the set. It was very tragic.
Yeah.
I had actually been a big fan of Lee's even before this film. I had seen all of his films that had been released up until that point, which wasn't very many. He only starred in, I think, 4 or 5 films, very much like his father, Bruce Lee. So this was obviously very upsetting. A lot of people do believe this would have been the movie that would have made Brandon Lee a really big movie star.
Yeah, it seemed to be, didn't it? He had a great presence in the film.
Yeah, he did. And he's fantastic, and the movie is just amazing. And I do think, honestly, that had he lived, it would have also still been a big hit, and it would have transformed his career overnight. But unfortunately, it didn't.
Watching the film and reading up about it afterwards, reading about what happened, it just such a terrible catalogue of errors that just led to tragedy.
That's exactly what it
was. So sad.
Yeah, it really was a number of things going wrong that just sort of all led to this, this terrible circumstance. But anyway, the film is fantastic, and Brandon Lee was terrific, and he's missed. I think he would have gone on to have an excellent career, but
definitely.
We'll never know for sure. So, All right, enough. I don't do emotion all that well. I'm much better at sarcasm and humor. So let's move on.
Let's go.
And we'll see what the film is all about. So, The Crow. It's the night before Halloween in Detroit, and this is the ugly, nasty Detroit, not a lot of Detroit, I think people consider that way, but it's definitely a dark vision of Detroit.
Yeah, it's like Gotham.
Yeah, exactly. Very much like Gotham City, right. Police Sergeant Albrecht is at the scene of a crime where a woman has been beaten and sexually assaulted, and her fiancé, a rock musician named Eric Draven, has been killed by being thrown out of the window of their loft. They were supposed to be getting married the next day. Officer Albrecht then meets Sarah, a young girl who shows up at the crime scene, and she tells him that she's a friend of Eric and Shelley, the deceased couple, and that they've basically been kind of taking care of her. We learned that it's because her mom is a drug addict, and she's mixed up with some really bad guys. Unfortunately, after about 30 hours of pain, Shelley does not survive the events of the night before. Officer Albrecht, however, stays with her until the end. A year later, a mysterious crow lands on the grave of Eric Draven, who then rises from the dead and climbs out of his grave. He goes back to his apartment and has a bunch of flashbacks that reveal his and Shelley's fates, and he also sees who's responsible for it. And it's a gang with members named T-Bird, Tintin, Funboy, and Skank.
They are great names, great gang names.
Oh, yeah. And, it might sound funny when you hear it on a show like this, but in the context of the film, it really works,
Yeah, they're nasty, and it just, you're right, it fits them.
So, guided by the crow, and now able to heal instantly, he begins exacting his revenge on everyone involved. While he's killing Funboy, he uses his mystical powers to convince Sarah's mother that she needs to be a good mom and give up the drugs by basically forcing the drugs out of her system. She basically leaks heroin out of her track marks. It's
a good scene.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Yeah.
So then Eric visits Albrecht, who tells him about what happened to Shelley, and the crow, Eric, basically absorbs all of Shelley's pain that Albrecht was there for, and he takes the pain from Albrecht and absorbs it into himself.
That's another powerful scene as well, actually, because it's like hours and hours of pain and agony she was going through, wasn't it, before she died?
It was, yeah. 30 hours is what they say in the film, so it's a lot. Then he meets up with Sarah, the young girl, and they have a touching reunion as well. After he goes through and dispatches all of the gang members who killed him and Shelley, Eric returns to his grave, but in killing all of the gang members, he's angered the sort of head of all the gangs named Top Dollar, and so he kidnaps Sarah to draw Eric in so he can get his own revenge.
I must say, though, Top Dollar, that's Michael Wincott, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
He's got such a good voice.
He really does.
Yeah, I think it was the first time. I think I'd seen him in other things, but the first time I'd really noticed him, and it was just that, we're gonna get him.
That's right. Yeah,
even deeper than that, though.
He's great. He plays a great villain. He does really have that awesome voice for it. So as Eric goes to save Sarah, Top Dollar's enforcer shoots the crow that sort of comes with Eric everywhere, and that's the source of his powers. And so without the crow being healthy, it costs Eric his invincibility. So he still goes in to save Sarah, and he ends up on the roof of the church in a brutal fistfight with Top Dollar. And eventually, even though Top Dollar starts to get the upper hand, Eric grabs him and releases all of Shelley's pain right into Top Dollar. And he basically zaps him with this collective 30 hours of everything that Shelley went through. And it shocks Top Dollar, shocks his system completely, and he falls off the roof and dies. Eric returns to his grave, where he's reunited with Shelley in the afterlife. And the film ends with the words, "Buildings burn, people die, but real love is forever." So I get a little choked up every time I hear that.
I could hear that, yeah. It's had a big, you've had a big impact on you, this film, hasn't it?
You know, it did. I was a big fan of the comic book that it was based on.
Oh, it's a very good one, isn't it? Yeah.
It is.
If people don't know, it was made by James O'Barr.
Right. It was an independent comic in the late 80s by James O'Barr, based on a real event that happened to him, loosely based on a real event that happened to him. His girlfriend was killed by a drunk driver, and this was sort of his therapy, his way of dealing with it. And I had read that book several times, and I loved it so much. It was so dark, and it was so different from all of the superhero comics that I'd been reading at the time and everything. And
really stood out, didn't it, amongst all the other comics?
Yeah, it definitely did. It was definitely unlike anything else. And, then they decided to make the film, which I got really excited about, and I was following it as much as you could back then. And then, of course, Brandon Lee dies, which I just, really hit me. And then the film came out, and I just, I fell in love with it. It's just such a great movie. And, I watched it not long ago at all, and it still holds up. I was a little worried that it might be dated, because it's 20 years old now. It really does hold up so well. And what I've always loved the most about it is that even though it's this, dark, violent action film, the action sequences in it are fantastic. I think Alex Proyas is a great director, and it's his visual style in the film really comes through. But I thought Brandon Lee's performance was amazing. And what I love is that at the heart of this whole, dark gothic action film is this love story.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's pure love is what causes it, or causes it to come back.
Exactly. I mean, he comes back to life not because of anything except for, obviously he comes back for vengeance, but what fuels that is this love he has for his fiancée. And I think that, it's a really powerful love story that's wrapped up in a great, action.
But I think it also helped that it had as well as the way it looked and the great fight scenes and the love story, it had a really good soundtrack as well.
Oh yeah, that soundtrack was, I think, on everybody's, in everybody's CD player back in the 90s. It was some really great, some really powerful music from some of the most popular bands at the time. It's fantastic stuff.
And also, I think it's probably one of the first comic book movies, proper comic book movies, wasn't it? Thinking about it. It
really, I mean, aside from like your classic 70s stuff, like the Superman movies and all, it sort of did launch the kind of modern day comic book film. And, it's also one of those things when everybody talks about Deadpool being like the first R-rated, comic book movie. And it's like, whoa, The Crow, was there before anybody else. It was before Blade. It was before Deadpool. It was the first R-rated comic book film that I know of. Maybe the original Punisher.
Oh, yeah. The Dolph Lundgren one.
Yeah, but that didn't really get released anywhere, like mainstream, Yeah. But
and it wasn't really Punisher, was it, that one?
No, it really wasn't. But The Crow really kind of launched in the 90s the sort of comic book renaissance that led to movies like Blade and the X-Men movies that started coming out and really, pushing comics into the mainstream. So, it's one of those films that I think, luckily it does have a good following. It's got a cult following. It was also a mainstream hit. It made pretty good money at the box office, and so it is a film that's appreciated. But I think for some people like myself, it definitely has a special place in my heart.
Oh, definitely. I think that's obvious from the way you've been talking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, because I always loved it from the beginning, but I don't think it affected me as much as it got to you. But I totally appreciate everything you said about it.
Right. Well, it's right. I mean, different people will certainly have different reactions to it.
And it all depends how what your frame of mind is as well when you first see the film.
Right. Exactly. And I think, the nice thing about it is, if you watch it and you get an emotional impact from it, great. If you watch it and you just love it because it's a kick-ass action movie, that's great too, because it is.
Yeah.
And, it is a great action film on top of everything else, so that's part of what I love about it so much. I love action movies, and it's so well done, and yet there's another layer to it. So it just works on multiple levels for me.
But what do we say though to people who, because we have laid down the rules where we don't do films with sequels, and there have been some other Crow movies.
Right. Well, so here's what we came up with for that. So originally I thought, because each Crow movie that's come out, only one came out theatrically, the other two came out direct to video, and each one of them deals deals with a different crow and different circumstances.
Yes.
So originally I thought, well, they don't even tie in at all. But I did realize that The Crow, City of Angels, which was the second movie, which starred Vincent Perez,
Yeah.
and was horribly disappointing.
Yeah.
It did feature Mia Kirshner as a grown-up Sarah.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So technically we're going to break our rules tonight, but we're just going to ignore that film because it wasn't very good.
It's not very
I don't
good.
really care. So
Yeah,
when it comes to The Crow, I'm just going to throw the rules out the window.
It's our show, and rules are malleable.
That's right, exactly.
And I think people will allow it.
I think they'll forgive us in this case. So, all right. So Phil, why don't you start things rolling then and give us your day after?
Okay, the day after all the events that have gone on, Sarah and her mum start chatting, getting on together, and Sarah spends some time with Albrecht trying to process what they've gone through, because it's been huge events, life-threatening, bizarre, strange things going on. They've got to get over the fact that Eric returned from the grave, which is mind-blowing and incredibly scary, but even though, they knew he was on their side. And also the crime gangs are now in disarray with the top dollar and everybody being killed, so there's a power vacuum going on in the city.
Right.
So that's what I've got for that.
Very good. I'm not too far removed from that, actually. So in my day after, Sarah and Albrecht go to the hospital, get patched up. They get tended to and released, and the next day they go to visit Eric's grave. Much like you said, there's a kind of a sense of, did that all really happen?
Yeah.
About the whole thing.
Yeah, you're right. You'd be thinking it was a dream, wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely.
Or a horrible nightmare.
Right, because it's kind of like you said, people coming back from the dead and, all of this, all this kind of supernatural stuff,
Yeah.
And when they get to the grave, the dirt doesn't even look like it's been disturbed. So, they're definitely sort of questioning the events. But there's also no denying that Top Dollar and all of his cronies are all dead. So, they're definitely sort of trying to process everything.
Yeah.
But while they're at the grave, a crow lands on the gravestone. It looks at them both for a minute, and then it flies away. And Albrecht says that it's got to be a coincidence, but Sarah looks at where the bird was standing and sees that it's left a small, bloody talon print right there on the gravestone, pretty much proving that it was the same crow that had been helping Eric that had gotten shot the day before.
Okay, I like that.
So there's my day after.
Very nice.
Thank you. How about your immediate aftermath?
Okay, well, it's a few weeks and months gone by. Sarah's getting on very well with her mum. They're building bridges. They're having a proper mother-daughter relationship once more. She's also met a young chap called Carl. He knows she went through a lot. He doesn't push her or anything, but eventually she talks about it. And at first he doesn't believe it, because it's obviously quite a fantastical story. But he tracks down Albrecht, who at this point is still a police officer, but he's drinking more and more because of the events he went through. He lost some good friends, good people, and he's still finding it hard to cope with exactly what happened. And the city is also still going through a bit of a crime wave. There's lots of low-level kind of crimes going on, but organisations start to come in, and it's as happens and things, people rise to power. Different gangs from different places are coming in, things like that. So it's all a bit of a mess. He's busier than ever, but he's drinking. But Carl, Sarah's new boyfriend, he gets confirmation from Albrecht about what happened and about the crow. So Carl starts researching this, and he finds more reports of similar events around the world about people apparently coming back from the dead, or stories of it anyway, and there's always this crow kind of thing that goes on. And it starts to become an obsession with him, and he starts talking about it more and more, and other people start listening to him. Mm-hmm. So that's my immediate aftermath. What about yours?
Interesting. I'm very curious to see where you're going with this.
Ah.
All right. So for my immediate aftermath, Sarah and her mom patch up their relationship. It takes some time, but her mom is working hard at it, and Sarah is receptive to her. She's off the drugs thanks to Eric's intervention, and Sarah, who had been missing a lot of school because she was mostly hanging out at Eric and Shelley's place, recommits to going back to school and getting a good education. She's seen what kind of future she has if she continues down the path that she's been on, so she begins working hard to make something of herself. Albrecht, meanwhile, gets promoted to detective and starts really making a difference in the town. He becomes known as one of the only cops in Detroit who's not on the take, and he basically becomes the Commissioner Gordon of Detroit, if you will.
Yeah, I can see that.
He and Sarah remain close over the years because of their shared experience with Eric, and that's where I'll leave it for now. So,
okay.
How about your long term?
Okay, well, I've got Sarah and her mum getting on really well. It's a few years later. They left Detroit in the interim, moved to LA. Sarah eventually got involved in the music business, and she's very happy. And her mum's just working away as well. And they're both in a really good place. Albrecht got himself together, and he managed to become detective. Sarah, though, ended up breaking up with Carl because his obsession with the crow, he was just getting more and more caught up in it. And Carl is now the leader of the Crows. like an organisation he started, a vigilante group who target perpetrators of violent crimes. Started off like the Guardian Angels kind of thing, but it's got more and more extreme, and the methods they use are getting worse and worse. And it isn't long before a murder of crows, as they put it, is the way they deal with people. So more dead bodies start popping up in Detroit. The crows spread through other cities because, as you see in Fight Club and other things, these kind of things spread. People, there's like some people enjoy a bit of violence, unfortunately. And end up one of the crows, one of the groups in LA. They're chasing down a suspected murderer who is actually innocent and start shooting at them during a car chase. And unfortunately, Sarah and her mum are caught in the crossfire and killed.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah.
So weeks later, though, Albrecht, he's come to LA and he's visiting Sarah's grave. His heart's broken at how unjust it all is and how he's lost another good friend to this violence which is spreading. And he turns away. He's just about to leave when a crow lands on Sarah's gravestone and taps, tap, tap.
Very nice.
Albrecht waits to welcome Sarah back and help her bring the crows down.
Very nice. I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, sad, but that's the way the film is, yeah. Fits in with the story, doesn't it?
Well, you know, it fits in right. It fits right in with the world of the crow, actually. So, absolutely. Although I did think when you talked about Carl getting obsessed with people coming back from the dead, I thought maybe he was going to turn out to be Rick's son from The Walking Dead.
Oh, yeah, good God, no. I didn't think
like,
of that.
Carl,
Yeah.
you know,
Carl.
I thought maybe that's where you're going.
Got to talk
with that.
stuff and things.
right, exactly. All right, very nice.
Thank you very much. So what about your long term?
All right, well, several years later, Sarah graduates from college. Albrecht has left the police force to enter politics. He's become committed to returning Detroit to its former glory and has successfully become the mayor of Detroit.
Oh, nice.
He decides to run for Senate so he can make bigger and more wide-sweeping changes. When Sarah graduates, he gives her a job on his campaign. They've remained close friends, and so she becomes not only a staff member, but also his closest confidant. Albrecht is building momentum, he's winning people over, and he's really on his way to revamping Detroit. When he announces a huge anti-crime reform bill as part of his platform, an up-and-coming crime boss named Gold Dust doesn't like what he's hearing and has Albrecht assassinated.
Oh.
Sarah is devastated because he's been like a father figure to her basically over the past 6 years. She ends up, crying kind of just in a daze, and she ends up back at Eric's grave, just crumbled on the ground and crying on the grave.
Yeah.
Suddenly, a crow lands on Eric's gravestone. The ground starts to move, and Eric Draven rises from the dead once again. The crow will have vengeance for Albrecht's death.
Oh, nice.
So there you go. So obviously some similarities in our endings there. I think in this world, that is sort of what, the type of thing that might happen.
Yeah, the crow's going to come back, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
Just so any first-time listeners, we neither Mike or myself know what the other one's written, so any similar endings like this is a nice surprise.
That's right. Absolutely. So, Phil, before we get into our extra special guest star, do you have any tidbits you want to share about The Crow?
Yeah, only just a couple of things. Apparently, Brandon Lee, he wasn't happy with the face makeup that the makeup artists were doing, so Lee and Alex, Brandon and Alex, they agreed that Brandon Lee would apply the makeup the night before they were shooting and sleep in it. So when he woke up, it'd have that slightly worn, the way it was like always messed up. It was never pristine, was it? So
no, exactly.
I think that was the best way he could do it. And also, James O'Barr, he initially wanted Johnny Depp to play Eric.
Oh, that's interesting.
But that didn't happen. And River Phoenix and Christian Slater turned down the role.
Really?
Yeah, which all of them at the time, and Johnny Depp at the time, 1994, that would have been quite interesting. I think all of those would have brought something different to it.
I think
could have all worked.
I don't know about Christian Slater. I don't know about him per se, but I think River Phoenix and Johnny Depp both actually would have been quite good in the role. For sure.
It would have been quite different, but it would have been interesting to see.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
All right, so now is the part of the show we're very excited about. So, like I said earlier, this is Rochelle Davis. She played Sarah in the film, and she is now all grown up. And so here are her thoughts on what happened to Sarah after the ending of The Crow.
So, as I explained, part of what we do is like to find out what happens to characters after movies end. So what do you think would have happened to Sarah after The Crow ended?
Well, I think after it ended, she would have had a little bit of peace inside of herself with being able to see him again, get the ring from him, all those little sentimental things. I actually wrote a thing about it on Facebook one time because it just really intrigued me, the idea of where she would have gone with her life, like what she would have done with herself. So I put her as like an artist and musician, kind of a scattered-brained, lives in a loft, wears like funky clothes, rides a motorcycle, does like graphic design for like an actual job, but does all her artwork for the side stuff. Stuff like that I would see Sarah doing. I would see her probably having a pretty good relationship with her mother at that point. And always having a really strong relationship with Officer Albrecht, and keeping in contact with him. So I just saw like her kind of blossoming into this beautiful, like, happier version of Sarah. Like, still that funky attitude and clothing and stuff, but in a more light-hearted kind of way, because she could let go of some of that grief that she went through during the film.
Very cool. Well, I personally am a bit of a sucker for happy endings in our show. My co-host likes to turn people into serial killers, so I don't know which way he's going to go with you yet, but I'm gonna probably lean towards your version of things.
I love serial killers. I'm all about it, but I don't think that's what Eric would want for Sarah. I think he would want to see Sarah move on. I just think that he would want her to move on and be happy. I don't think he would want to see her like become a vengeful, mean-spirited person. However, the city she was lived in my version was that it was starting to go downhill, and she started to take on this idea of maybe becoming a kind of a vigilante in the area, like a live vigilante.
Right.
With the help of like her boyfriend to do the technical stuff and like plant cameras in her head and things so she could beat up bad guys and such. But that was the only, like, it wasn't like really killing. It was more of just like cleaning up the area and letting them know she was boss in the area and like not to mess with her.
Very cool. I love that.
That was great, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear a viewpoint on what you thought happened with the character.
Right, exactly. It was cool to see. And a couple of minor similarities even, so that's kind of fun.
Yeah. And also our first guest star, how cool's that?
Yeah, pretty exciting. Yeah. And from a movie that is so near and dear to my heart even. It's pretty exciting.
Even better, yeah.
Pretty exciting, I'm not going to lie. So I also got the chance to ask Rochelle a few other questions about making the movie, so I thought we would share those with you guys as well. So here is Rochelle Davis one more time talking about making The Crow.
So, Rochelle, what do you remember most about making The Crow?
What I remember most is that all of the cast and crew was really fun and like lighthearted and like childlike. So I felt I was always a little above my age, and I felt like the crew was a little below their age in funness, not in maturity, but just in the way they had fun. So my best memories is just that it was just a hoot, just a lot of fun, a lot of like little games and laughs and jokes and, picking on each other, banter, stuff like that.
And, I was curious about your character. Sarah's obviously a very, like, tough, tomboyish character. Was that very you, or was that the opposite of you at that time in your life?
That was a little bit like me. I was a little mixture of the two. Like, I like to put on makeup and do my hair and go out and look pretty, but then there were times that I just put on shorts and a t-shirt and climbed trees and got into dirt. So it was kind of it wasn't really either of those things, because Sarah wasn't like out playing in dirt and climbing trees. She was, skateboarding and doing the tough street girl thing. So that really wasn't me, but I had to kind of embody it with what I did know about being tough, and then add in the sensitive part that I knew I had in myself to show that she had this really soft side that she wasn't allowed to show people. Often, at least.
Right. All right, one last question for you then. Just wanted to, obviously a lot of people love The Crow, love Brandon Lee, so I was just curious what your experience working with him was like.
My experience with him was phenomenal. He was one of the nicest men I've ever met in my life. I have met very few people as sweet and kind and good-hearted and just pure as he was. So working with him was amazing, and I love being able to come out to these conventions and such, because there's so many people that didn't get a chance to experience his light and his spirit. And I've spoken with his mother about this many times via email. We've never met in person yet, but we email back and forth, and I tell her, that my main concern when I go to a convention is to let the fans know what an amazing, incredible guy he was as a person and as an actor. and just hope that spirit just keeps flowing through people through the movie and through knowing about him being so amazing.
That's fantastic. Well, Rochelle, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us.
No problem. It was fun.
Brilliant stuff. Many thanks to Rochelle for taking the time to do that.
All right, so moving on, we have some other stuff we want to get to. Before we get into our little mini feature, as we like to call them, we have some reader feedback we want to share. So, Phil, I'm going to start things off, if that's okay with you.
That works for me.
So, longtime listener J. Tanner Perry, who's written into the show before and actually was the person who suggested that we do an ending for The Last Starfighter.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
He shared his after the ending of The Last Starfighter with us, so I thought it'd be fun for you guys to hear what he had going on there. So, according to Jay, the screening process for recruiting people to the Starfighter program are so lax that Zur sees an opportunity to continue his fight. He starts off slow, but over the years, his people reach high positions in the government. Before the government can realize what's happened, the Star League becomes the Kodan Armada, and Zur is in command of the greatest pilots in the galaxy.
I like that, the swine. So, yeah.
Alex, Maggie, and a bunch of rebels flee and end up on an isolated ice planet where they meet another fleeing group of rebels fighting off a different type of empire. Very nicely done, Jay. Thank you for sharing that with us. I have to say, personally, I especially appreciate you bringing it around to meet up with another movie because, as we know, that is a favorite of mine. So
yeah, it does seem to be a running theme.
Yeah, nicely done.
Yeah, very good. And for those who want to know, it was episode 9 when we talked about The Last Starfighter along with Pulp Fiction.
Exactly.
Also with episode 9, we talked about the top 10 films in 1986, and we asked what the top 10 films of that year were, and Abdusemi and my Abdallah, apologies if I didn't pronounce the name right, but long-time listener, he gave us his top 10, and it was 10, The Money Pit, 9 was 9.5 Weeks, 8 was The Mission, which is a great film, 7, The Name of the Rose, which I love as well, 6 was Cobra, bit of Stallone.
Yeah, I love that one.
5, The Colour of Money, which, as I said at the time, yeah, I didn't quite enjoy that one as much as I thought I would. 4 was Manhunter, which is excellent. 3 was Top Gun. 2 was Hannah and her Sisters. And number 1, like me, was Big Trouble in Little China. So thank you very much for sharing them.
Yeah, great list. Obviously, a lot of picks that we both agreed with. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so now we're going to move on to our next mini feature. And this is something we do in between our endings and our top 10s just to sort of have a little fun. And this might be our most ridiculous one yet. What do you think, Phil?
It's getting up there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. All right, so today's new feature is called Kenny Rogers in Film. And this came about actually... See, it just sounds stupid when you say it out loud.
You say it out loud, yeah.
So this came about actually for a couple of reasons. First of all, this may not be known to many people. I'm actually a huge Kenny Rogers fan. I listen to his music. I love his music. It's one of those weird things that I picked up from my mom when I was a kid, and I've just always loved Kenny Rogers. So anytime I have an opportunity to talk about Kenny Rogers, I'll take it.
And he has also been in films.
He has been in films, but that's not what we're going to talk about because that would make too much sense. So this actually got its genesis because of a throwaway joke in another podcast that I listened to, the great Mark Kermode and Simon Mayo. They're also film critics, and they made a throwaway joke about Kenny Rogers being in Taxi Driver, which got me thinking about what would other classic films be like if Kenny Rogers had been cast in one of the major roles. So we're going to try this out. This is a brand new idea, and we haven't really discussed it all that much, so this will either be really cool or really terrible. I apologize in advance if it's the latter. And basically what we're going to do is Phil and I are going to try and kind of stump each other a little. We're going to throw out a film at each other without the other one knowing what it is, and basically see what role we would recast on the fly with Kenny Rogers instead of the actor who was in the role. So who's going first, Phil? Who's going to be the first guinea pig for this fantastic experiment?
Well, it's your idea, so I will give you the film.
Okay.
You pick.
All right.
Okay, so the first film for Kenny Rogers, it's the 1987 sci-fi action horror film Predator.
All right, so who would Kenny Rogers play in Predator, huh? Well, I don't know that we can lose Dutch because I don't know that I can fully get behind Kenny Rogers taking on the Predator all on his own. You know who I think he would be?
Go on.
I would cast him in the role of Billy. Billy, as you may recall, was the giant Native American who took on the Predator single-handedly and cut himself across the chest with his giant machete. It was pretty much a big badass. So I could see Kenny Rogers getting all shirtless and, like grim and gritty and taking on the Predator and only to have his spine ripped out. I think that would work.
Okay, and it screams would be so musical and beautiful.
Exactly. I think, he would get up on that giant fallen log and he'd rip off his shirt and he'd drag his machete across his chest and he'd say, "You got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them."
Oh, Christ. I didn't know he had to quote some song lyrics of his. Oh, no.
You don't have to, but I happen to be able to do that because I'm a big fan of his music, so why not?
No, I like that. Yeah, as Billy, he'd be good.
There you go. All right, good choice, Phil.
Get to the chopper, Kenny.
All right, so I didn't stray too far, actually, for you then. So my film for you is the 1982 classic John Carpenter film, The Thing.
Oh, The Thing, one of my all-time favourite films. Okay, so who Kenny Rogers would, of course, be? It's got to be Charles.
Yes.
Yeah, Charles, yeah. Because he's there, he's cool, he's going to say how it is, he's not going to like any messing around. He's also going to be on the same... Kenny Rogers has got an awesome beard, like Kurt Russell has an awesome beard.
Right.
So, they're going to be on the same side for a bit. And then just imagine at the end...
Uh-huh.
You've got McCready and Childs, Kurt Russell and Kenny Rogers having a face-off.
that is quite the mental image, I have to say.
Instead of the bottle of whiskey, or as some people think it could be, petrol, instead of getting passed around, they pass around a guitar.
There you go.
There you go.
That is quite the mental image of Kurt Russell and Kenny Rogers sitting out in the snow by a dying fire. At the end of that film. Oh, I like that. Good choice.
Thank you. I appreciate you picking that film.
Oh, of course. Listen, I know what a fan you are. I am too. So
it's going to be crazy doing after the ending for The Thing at some point.
Yeah, that's definitely on the list, and that'll be showing up, I think, sooner rather than later. So, all right. Well, that was Kenny Rogers in film. I don't know about you, Phil. I had a good time with it.
I like that. Yeah, good. Worked well.
So we'll see. Readers, let us know what you think. We're rotating these mini features, so we'd love to hear whether you like them, which ones you like the most, if you think Kenny Rogers in film was fun, if you never want to see it again. Let us know. We'll tell you. I can get in touch with us in just a little bit. All right, so let's move on then to our 100 years of film in 100 episodes. This week we are doing 1974. Phil, why don't you take us back in your time machine and tell us what the world was like in 1974.
Okay, let's jump in the DeLorean and let's see what happened. So let's set the scene. 1974, we've got the British Prime Minister was Harold Wilson, and over in the US, President Nixon said bye-bye, and Gerald Ford said hello. Some of the events that happened in the year, we had Patty Hearst was kidnapped and then turned up a bit later on the side of the kidnappers. Peter Penchley's Jaws was published. Charles de Gaulle Airport was opened in France. Lucille Ball aired the finale of Here's Lucy. I think it was the last ever TV show she did. Over in China, the Terracotta Army was discovered, which I thought had been discovered a lot earlier than that.
Yeah, me too. I didn't realize it was that recent.
The world population reached the heady heights of 4 billion people.
If only.
Yeah, and Stephen King published his first novel, which was Carrie.
Wow. Which
is amazing, yeah. ABBA won the Eurovision Song Contest with Waterloo and brought us all those terrible costumes, but people seem to love them.
Right.
Philippe Petit crossed the Twin Towers on a high wire, which was in the excellent, was it Man on Wire, the documentary?
Yes, yeah, Man on Wire.
Yeah. And then we also had The Walk, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt last year. Mm-hmm. Over in the BBC, there was a service called CFAX. It was like a text thing, which you probably, I don't know if you had anything like that in the States, but it just had all the news. When they stopped broadcasting the programmes of an evening, this would come on, give all the news, and it would go to different pages. You could go scroll. It was sort of like a forerunner to the internet, but it was a load of rubbish.
Okay.
We also had the Rumble in the Jungle, where Muhammad Ali knocked out George Foreman.
Right.
John Lennon joined Elton John on stage at Madison Square Garden. Mm-hmm. You've always mentioned Rubik's Cube was invented, but also, I like this one because I was a big fan of the game, Dungeons & Dragons was released in the US.
Oh, very cool.
Kraftwerk released his Autobahn. That's from a friend Rich, who likes all the electronic music.
Gotcha.
And most interestingly was the last Japanese World War II soldier, Taiwan-born Private Teru Nakamura, surrendered on the Indonesian island of Marotta 34 years after beginning service.
Wow, that's pretty crazy.
I always found that story fascinating when I was a kid.
Yeah, for sure.
So that was 1974.
All right. Okay, well, before we get started, I'm just going to go ahead and preamble this by saying it's time for. I really need a theme song for this. Dun 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 dun. Mike's controversial opinion of the week.
Okay.
And my
yeah, we should get a little jingle. First.
Yeah, I really should.
Yeah.
So if any listeners out there want to create a jingle for Mike's controversial opinion of the week, be my guest. Meanwhile, my controversial opinion of the week is I do not love 70s cinema. If I had to pick my least favorite decade of cinema, it would be the 70s. And I know that that's the era that most people consider like the most impactful and important and amazing, decade of filmmaking.
It was a big decade for film.
Yeah, and I hate most of them. I really just don't like the 70s. Everything is dark and grim and gritty and 7.5 hours long, and boy, I'm not really a fan. So this is an interesting.
There are lots of, as you say, lots of dark and depressing films, but some incredibly well made films. But I understand there are lots of downers in the 70s.
Right. And I do...
probably lots of uppers were also taken in the 70s.
But thank you. Phil will be here all week.
Yeah, try the fish.
Listen, I mean, to be fair, I do love, I'm sure there's a lot of films from the 70s that I love, and I'm going to talk about some of them in my list, but by and large, I'm not a huge fan of the 70s. And just to prove my point, though, I want to point out there are 3 films out of my top 10 that are 90 minutes. And the average running time of my top 10 films is still 2 hours and 1 minute. I did the math. The average running time is a full 2 hours and 1 minute. And that's with 3 90-minute films on the list. So that just tells you something about the kind of the bloat, if you will, of the decade. But
one thing as well, I did notice for some of the films on my list, the release dates were sort of like December-ish or January of the year. So they might have been out in the US maybe the year before, the year after, but as far as I can see, they were 1974 films at some point.
Right. Yeah, we have
depending
had
on the
some
country
people,
and so.
Right. We have had some people ask online about that because one of the films we mentioned from '86 came out a different year, a different country. Obviously with Phil and I being from different countries and the way movie release dates work, there's occasionally probably going to be a film that may or may not have come out in a slightly different year in your neck of the woods. We're just going to do the best we can, and hopefully, obviously the spirit of the list will remain the same, so we're not going to get too bogged down in whether it was, December of 74 or January of 75 with limited release or, whatever. We're just going to go with the list and see what happens. So
and again, as we always say, we're not saying that these were the best films of the year. We're just saying these are the ones we really enjoyed.
Exactly. All right, well, I'll kick things off because I may as well get through the 70s as quickly as I can. My number 10 is Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise, which is something, it's something of a cult classic. It's a very oddball film. It's a modern disco rock update of Phantom of the Opera. It is a musical, like a rock and roll musical. It's very surreal. It's very bizarre. It has Paul Williams in one of the leading roles, and it's a very unique film. But I have to say, it stands out for me just because it was so different, and it's kind of kooky, and it's a little too long, like I've said.
Yeah.
But I do like Brian De Palma, and this was one of his. It's before he got into his Hitchcock era and all that stuff. So it's definitely a very different movie for him. So
it is a crazy film.
Yeah, it is. So that's my number 10, but that kind of just tells you where I'm at with the 70s, that if that makes my number 10, I didn't have a lot to choose from for this year. So
Okay. Well, my number 10 is Sam Peckinpah's Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia.
Good choice.
Which stars the brilliant Warren Oates, and it's a bizarre kind of film, but it's a guy goes to try and get the head of this dead criminal because he knows he'll get a lot of money for it, and he basically loses the plot as he's going along. But it's a great film.
Very cool. Now I'm going to say the other thing that's going to work against me on this list is that I haven't seen a lot of films from the 70s because I generally don't care for the era. I've skipped over a lot of films that might show up on other people's lists. So this will be interesting because I'm sure there's going to be some choices that I would have included if I'd seen them. But that's not one that I've seen.
It's the nature of the game, and I'm sure you will be pointing out films that some people haven't seen, and
sure.
they'll know films that we've not seen.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. All right, so moving on then, my number 9 is The Taking of Pelham 123, which is a great subway heist movie starring Walter Matthau and Robert Shaw, and it's just a cracking good thriller, a lot of fun, very tense.
Yeah. Oh no, it's a really good film, and it almost made my list.
Right.
I think it did at one point. Let me just check my list, because it did change a few times when I was writing it. Yeah, it didn't make the final cut, but it's very good film.
Yep.
And if you've only seen the remake with John Travolta and Denzel Washington, go see the original because it's an amazing film.
Yes, agreed.
Also, was that one of the? Was it that film which gave Quentin Tarantino the idea to use colours for the names in Reservoir Dogs?
I believe it is actually.
Maybe,
yes.
yeah.
I want to say that they have similar code names in the film. Yes,
because it's all colours in that one, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, we'll say it is.
Yeah, we'll say it is. Sure, why not?
Okay, so for my number 9, I've got The Golden Voyage of Sinbad.
Another one I haven't seen.
Oh, yeah. You've not seen, you
Well,
might have.
Maybe I have. Let me take that back.
This was the one that was obviously got Ray Harryhausen's brilliant stop-motion animation.
Yes, I have seen that one. Okay.
Well, a few of them did. It had John Philip Law as Sinbad and starred Tom Baker, who was one of the doctors in Doctor Who.
Right.
And it had the guy with the golden mask to hide his disfigured face. And they go off. And what were the creatures that were in there? There was the six-armed Kali. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the Ray Harryhausen ones.
Right.
And there's a griffin and a centaur, and it's Ray Harryhausen, and he's great. And I think I always love watching his films.
Sure. I remember watching that one a lot when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's one of those ones. Yeah, you as a kid, and it just also had Caroline Munro, which didn't hurt.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's a good film, and it's I like it.
Very good.
And I always find out Sinbad though in recent years I think they've tried to do a few Sinbad films, but they've never taken off.
Yeah, and I think they did a TV show also. It seems like they keep trying to relaunch the character, but they can't seem to get it right for some reason.
Because it's a great character. But yeah, it's hopefully one day we'll see another good one.
I'm sure we will. I'm sure everything cycles around eventually.
Yeah.
So for my number 8, here we go. This is going to be my oddball choice, if you will, and it is Herbie Rides Again.
Oh, yeah.
Because I am an unabashed fan of the Love Bug movies. I love the original Love Bug. I love Herbie Rides Again. I even have a soft spot for Herbie Goes Bananas, although obviously the weakest of the three. But yeah, I just find those movies really endearing. I think they're really fun. I watched them not long ago. They hold up really well. I can't wait to introduce them to my kids. I think they'll really enjoy them as well. So Herbie Rides Again. I'm not embarrassed.
Well, you shouldn't be, because I always like the Herbie films.
Yeah, they're great, aren't they?
Yeah, always good fun. I mean, it's funny how much character you can get out of just like a Volkswagen Beetle.
Right.
It's got me that.
Yeah, it really is.
Good pick.
Thank you.
So my number 8, we've got James Bond film, The Man with the Golden Gun.
Mm-hmm. Excellent choice.
Roger Moore. For those who don't know, James Bond is everybody knows James Bond.
Yeah.
So we got Roger Moore going up against Christopher Lee as Scaramanga, the man with 3 nipples, on a golden gun.
Right.
But it's a great Bond film, lots of fun, all the classic elements, and it's also got the dude from Fantasy Island in, which doesn't hurt.
Yeah, that's definitely the highlight, is Tattoo showing up.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep. Very nice. For number 7, I have Blazing Saddles, the Mel Brooks classic.
Oh, very good.
I don't know what else I can say about it, but it's Blazing Saddles. Either you've seen it or you haven't.
You could always. What about? There we go.
There you go.
That was an actual quote from the film.
Right, exactly.
Okay, we got my number 7 is California Split, which was directed by Robert Altman and stars Elliot Gould and George Segal as a pair of gamblers. It's a 70s one, as we know. Well, that's a stupid thing to say. Yeah, the pair of gamblers. It's quite funny. It's quite dramatic. I think I've not seen it though, but Mississippi Ground with Ryan Reynolds and
Ben Mendelsohn.
Yeah, Ben Mendelsohn. I think that new film's sort of a take on this one, but
makes sense.
California Split's it's a great little movie.
Sounds good. I'll have to watch it one of these days.
Yeah, one of those good gambling ones that you sometimes get to come along every now and then.
Sure, always a fun genre for the most part, I think.
Yeah.
Well, my number 6 is a return to the genre that we all know that I love very much, and it is the classic disaster film Earthquake, starring Charlton Heston. And I want to say this is one of the first disaster films that I saw actually on television when I was young. And the 70s were a great era for those big disaster picks, And
oh yeah, there was lots of them, didn't there?
Earthquake is definitely one of the best, and a little long, as I've mentioned, but it's great. It looks fantastic, and for my money, it still holds up, even though some of the special effects obviously are a little bit dated, but great fun.
Yeah, good stuff. And my number 6 is a horror one. It's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, written and directed by Tobe Hooper, and it's a classic horror film. And what I always liked the first time I saw it was the fact you get the creepy hitchhike at the beginning, and then nothing really much happens for quite a bit, but then suddenly, bam, Leatherface is there, and it's very unsettling. I think it's not so much scary. Well, it is scary, but it's more unsettling than anything else because it just has this sort of like a heightened realism to it.
Right.
So there's something about it which is different from lots of other horror movies, but it stuck with me.
Sure. Well, I think it's stuck with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, it didn't make my list. I'm not going to lie. I've never been a huge fan of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films. I do appreciate the first one. It is a very disturbing film, and I think it's a little beyond where I like to go with my horror films.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, it's a classic of the genre, and I do respect it for what it did and how it was made. But definitely a little bit outside of my top 10.
Oh, totally understandable.
Very nice. All right, well, my number 5 then is a film that has appeared on your list already. It is The Man with the Golden Gun. I'm a huge James Bond fan, always have been, always will be. I actually do like Roger Moore very much, even though I know he's probably the least favorite James Bond of them all.
Well, he was the first one I saw as a kid. Yeah, it was Live and Let Die.
Exactly. I think I have a theory that most people's favorite James Bond is the one that they grow up watching. So while I wouldn't qualify Roger Moore as my favorite James Bond, I certainly do really very much appreciate him as Bond, and I do love his movies, regardless. So, but there you go. That's my pick.
Very good. Yeah, my number 5 is Francis Ford Coppola's, wait for it, The Conversation, starring Gene Hackman, Terry Garr, Robert Duvall, Harrison Ford, and a few other people. Gene Hackman, he plays a surveillance expert who's put in a difficult situation. He's listening things and he's not sure what he's listening to, whether it's the right thing or not. Gets paranoid. It's a tour de force of acting from Gene Hackman. It's a very well made film, great. But as you say, it's got one of those, it's a bit bleak as well as many 1970s films were. And also in Enemy of the State, there's sort of that kind of nod. Gene Hackman's character could also be the same sort of character from The Conversation. Right, exactly. That is a great little tribute, if you will. But a great movie. Indeed, very good choice. My number 4 pick is The Godfather Part 2. Francis Ford Coppola was the director, starring Al Pacino and a cast of thousands. I can't even name them all here. Yeah. Honestly, the only reason The Godfather 2 came up so high on my list and didn't make it into the top first spot or second spot was because it's just so long. 3 hours and 22 minutes. I mean, it's really like like 2 films. I actually had to watch it over 2 nights because I couldn't make it through. And I remember getting through like an hour and a half the first night and then checking the time and realizing I still had 2 whole more hours to get through. It's so long. And so I love it. It's a great film, but it definitely lost a few points for just a ridiculously long running time. Understandable, yeah. Okay, well, my number 4 is Chinatown. Yeah, Roman Polanski, Jack Nicholson, Faye Dunaway, John Huston. Beautiful looking film, great noir mystery, goes to very dark places, but Jack Nicholson looks amazing wearing a plaster for most of it on his nose. No, just a really, really good film. Well, I'm going to say that's another one that isn't on my list, believe it or not, and the reason for that, here I definitely need a jingle because this is going to be Mike's second controversial opinion of the week. Dun, 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 yeah, thank you. I hate Jack Nicholson. Oh my God. With a passion. I always have. I do not like him at all. I think he turned in about 3 good performances in the 70s and then pretty much has just done the exact same thing in every movie he's ever been in since then. Oh my God. So that explains why I didn't like Christian Slater for The Crow. No, Christian Slater's all right. I just don't think he would have been a good fit for that. But I've seen Chinatown. It's a good film. I don't hate it or anything like that, but I just am not a fan of most anything that Jack Nicholson is involved in, with a couple of exceptions. So, that one definitely falls short for me. Sorry. Well, that's okay. I mean, if you don't like an actor, it can colour you to lots of films. And, right. Yeah, it's hard to enjoy a film where somebody you don't like as an actor is in almost every frame of it. But, listen, my mission apparently is to just, completely, bleed us of listeners by angering They'll
people.
Keep coming back to see what you're going to say next.
Right. They're going to come back just so they can be like, what ridiculous crap is Mike going to spew this week? Well, it made one of our lists. Oh, there you go. So that's good. Yeah. So as always, you're safe. We cover for everything you see. Right. All right. What about your number 3? My number 3 is the Mel Brooks classic Young Frankenstein, or Frankenstein, as it may be correctly pronounced, starring Gene Wilder, Marty Feldman, and Madeline Kahn. Of course, it's a comedy classic. I think it's pretty much one of the most popular comedies of all time, so I don't think I need to tell people how great it is. But if you haven't seen it, it's pretty darn great. Put the candle back. Exactly. My number 3 was, you've already mentioned it, was The Godfather Part 2. Very good. I think both of them were nominated. Both The Godfather Part 2 and The Conversation were nominated
for Best Picture.
Yeah, I mean, how do you turn out The Godfather Part 2 and The Conversation in the same year? I mean,
it's crazy, isn't it?
I know they were made at different times, but still, that's a pretty ridiculous 1-2 punch for a director.
So many good actors, so many great moments in the film, great scenes.
Yeah. Yeah, how does Al Pacino not win that Oscar that year too for Best Actor? That one kills me.
It's bizarre, isn't it? But I mean, you watch The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2. It's just a huge, great, big, amazing story of
that'll take a week of your life.
Yeah, I know, but with these amazing performances, and I think this similar thing with you, it wasn't higher. I mean, it sounds a bit silly, but it's just a bit too long. It's not one of the ones you can just throw on and go, yeah.
Right, well, that's exactly,
There's others I enjoy watching a lot more. Well, there's two more I enjoy watching a lot more.
Right.
So what about your number 2?
So number 2, once again, a film that's appeared on your list, and it is The Conversation. Speaking of the Francis Ford Coppola 1-2 punch there. Much like you said, it's a great film, an awesome conspiracy, paranoia thriller, and there's sort of I don't want to reveal anything, but the way things are revealed at the end, is like it really. When I first watched it, it really caught me by surprise, and I was just like, "Oh, that is brilliant," And so
it's just sort of the way it delivers everything. It just
right. It's just a really cool film. So I do love that movie.
The final scene always just stuck with me as well.
Yep, exactly.
No, good pick. My number 2 is, you've mentioned this one, Young Frankenstein.
Right.
Mel Brooks, Jim Wilder. Who are the other people we didn't mention? Terry Garr, Cloris Leachman, Peter Boyle, of course, played the monster.
Right, of course, yep.
Yeah. It's a brilliant, beautiful black and white film. Very, very funny and so quotable.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
All right, so time for the number 1. Now, I'm interested because I don't think that your number 1 and mine are going to be the same. So I'm very curious to see what you come up with. But my number 1 film of 1974 is, once again, a disaster movie, and it is The Towering Inferno.
I had a feeling it might be that one.
One of my all-time favorites. And again, I know I've said this a lot tonight, but these movies are 30 years old. No, they're 40 years old now. The Towering Inferno really holds up well because the special effects being fire isn't anything that really dates. So the fashions and stuff and the hairstyles are a little out of date, but the story holds up really well. And there's a little bit. It takes a little bit to get going in the beginning, but then once the fire breaks out, man, you're talking just like an hour and a half of pure suspense and action and destruction and
was Fred Astaire.
Yeah, Fred Astaire's in it. Steve McQueen. I mean, just a great cast, great film. One of those movies that if you haven't seen, I do highly recommend. So that's my number 1 pick.
Well, yeah, that didn't make my list because I think the problem was the first time I saw it, I was a young kid and I think my mum and dad were watching it, and as you said, it takes a while to get going, and it just bored the pants off me the first time I saw it.
I can understand that.
I've seen it since, and enjoyed it a lot more being older. But it's it wasn't going to make my list though because of seeing it as a kid.
Fair enough.
But it's an amazing cast was put together. I think didn't Paul Newman and Steve McQueen make sure they had exactly the same amount of words?
Yeah, that's the legend. I've never fact checked that.
I like to think that's true. That's a good story, that one.
Right. Also, but what is true though, and this is a story that the aforementioned Mark Kermode likes to trot out pretty regularly. So if there's any listeners who listen to that show, you'll have already heard this story. But it is true that there was an issue with the billing as to who was going to get top billing. So I forget which one goes which, but one of their names was lower and to the left, and the other one's name was higher and to the right, so that neither one of them could be seen as being above or before the other one. And that's actually a practice that has continued on to this day. When you have equal co-stars, a lot of times you'll see that approach so that you can't ever fully say who's first or who's second, so that is true.
Okay, I'll have to look out for that on posters.
Yep.
Oh, good stuff. Okay, well, my number 1, it's
what do you got?
One you've already mentioned, and it's another Mel Brooks film. It's Blazing Saddles.
Ah, there you go. Of course, I should have known.
Because it just, I've loved it since the first time I've seen it. I know it's not as tight, I think, as Young Frankenstein. And as my friend Pete mentioned the other day as well, he said the end sort of falls apart a little bit.
Right.
But it's just, I just remember every time I see it, it just makes me laugh so much. Even now, even though you know it's coming up, just... Just so funny.
Right.
I mean, like Hedy and Hedley. It's just, I just love it. Cleveland Little, Gene Wilder, Harvey Korman, Slim Pickens, Madeline Kahn, Dom DeLuise at the end. It's just a wonderful, funny movie.
Without a doubt. I don't think anybody can really argue with Blazing Saddles being your top choice for the year. So, very nice.
That was on 1974.
Okay, so Phil, why don't you run down the box office for us and see how we stacked up against the numbers?
Well, we did have we had quite a few films actually in this top 10, but the top box office for the year of 1974, we had number 10, Murder on the Orient Express.
Good one.
Yeah, number 9 was Herbie Rides Again.
Yay!
Yeah, I know she got there. Number 8 was Benji.
Almost made my list, actually.
Actually, I don't know. I don't know if I've actually seen that one.
Oh, right.
There's quite a few Benji films. They probably
Right.
all. I might have seen it, but they all blend into one.
Yep.
Number 7 was The Longest Yard.
Mm-hmm.
Number 6 was Earthquake.
Right.
Number 5, Young Frankenstein, which we both had.
Yep.
Number 4, Man with the Golden Gun.
Yep.
Because everybody loved Bond.
Of course.
Number 3 was Godfather Part 2.
Wow.
So we weren't that far off.
No, I'm surprised, though. I would have guessed it was the highest grossing of the year.
No. Number 2 was Towering Inferno.
Yay!
Number 1 was Blazing Saddles.
Well, there you go. All right. So we were clearly, somewhat on the pulse of the moviegoers of the 70s.
But yeah, not too far. Only a couple of differences.
Right. All right. So if you have a top 10 list of 1974 and you would like to share that with us for us to read out on the air, we would love for you to do that. Phil, why don't you tell people how they can get a hold of us?
Okay. On Twitter, we are down as after_the_ending. And you can find us on facebook.com/aftertheendingpodcast. And just for those of you, if you want to try and listen to us on a different way, we're on iTunes and also on SoundCloud. If you search for After the Ending on both, we will pop up.
Right. And you can email us now at aftertheending@verizon.net. That's Verizon, Verizon.net. All right, so Phil, what are we going to be tackling next week?
Next week, we will be trying to discover the secrets of the 3 shells, because we'll be talking about Demolition Man and Guys and Dolls. That's a bit of a mix, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fun to mix things up a little bit, go back to the 50s. This will be our first kind of classic film, I think, won't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the ones we've done.
Yeah, so that'll be fun, and it'll be our first musical, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely that. So it's going to be interesting.
Right.
And also we will be looking at our top 10 films of the year 1997.
1997. Good times, good times.
But at the minute, I can't think of any film from 1997.
Well, that'll be the fun, won't it? Discovering what good and what
Yes.
terrible films came out in that year. So.
Yes, should be fun.
Alrighty, well, that's going to wrap us up for this evening. We want to thank you all once again for listening. As always, if you can swing over to iTunes and leave us a review and or a rating, that would be greatly appreciated.
5 stars.
5 stars is the best. And with that, we will leave you to enjoy your movies. I'm Mike Spring.
And I'm Phil Edwards.
And we'll see you next week.
After the Ending. I'm very excited. Looking forward to the guest spot.
Excellent. Don't sound too excited there, Phil.
I know.
You're like,
I know. I keep saying no a lot, so I'm sorry about having to get rid of all these.
That's all right. I'm used to it from myself.
I did it again. Sorry.
But for now, why don't we move on to another The movie with a 4-letter word. That sounds very wrong when I put it that way. I don't know. Let me try that again. So why don't we move on then to our second film, which is very near and dear to my heart, and it is The Crow.
Yep. Sorry, I have to sip of water then. Yep.
No, listen, hey, you know, when you offer biting commentary like that, who am I to argue, you know?
Yep.
Right.
I'm on a roll.
It's very deep, Phil, very deep.
Well, my friends do often say that when they ask me what a film was like, I often just say it was all right.
Right.
But I like to think it's different levels. I go, if it's really good, I go, it was all right.
Right.
But if it's not that good, it was all right.
Right. I get you. I understand.
You know, and then
completely.
there's about 70 different levels in between.
Right. Officer Albrecht meets a young girl named Sarah, who is a friend of Eric and Shelley's. All right. Let me get it up here. So, okay. That sounded bad. I can't say that. So according to Jay, the screening process for recruiting people to not the last Starfighter program, that would be a terrible program to be in. Hey, come on. We got a class of 30. One of you is going to be the last Starfighter.
Yeah.
Oy.
Imagine none of it was literally called
Right.
The Last Starfighter. Yeah. I never thought of that before, yeah.
Terrible.
Yay, I'm the last one.
Right. All my friends are dead.
You've got to fight these thousands of other people.
Yeah, exactly. Good luck.
The Thing, one of my all-time favourite films of all time. I'll say all time one more because it is of all time. Yeah. Get in touch with us on Twitter, and you can find us there. What's the word? At. That's not flowing at all, is it?
Should be a good time indeed.
I'm looking forward to that.
Keep saying All right.